I never imagined that a single moment could shatter 27 years of silence. My name is Margaret, and for nearly 3 decades, I perfected the art of biting my tongue, swallowing my words, and shrinking myself to fit into corners where I wasn't wanted. This is the story of how I finally found my voice, and how one humiliating moment became the catalyst for the most profound transformation of my life. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning in March. I was 62 years old, recently widowed for 4 years, and living in the guest house behind my son David's sprawling home in suburban Connecticut. After my husband Richard passed away from a sudden heart attack, David insisted I move closer to family. At the time, it felt like a blessing. I sold the home Richard and I had built together over 35 years of marriage, packed up my life into boxes, and relocated to be near my only child. What I didn't anticipate was how invisible I would become. David married Jessica when he was 31, right after making partner at his law firm. She was 26, beautiful in that effortless way that made other women feel inadequate, and ambitious in a manner that left no room for weakness. She worked in marketing for a major pharmaceutical company, pulling in a 6-figure salary and wielding her success like a weapon. From the moment I met her, I sensed that she saw me as competition rather than family. But I told myself I was imagining things. I smiled through the backhanded compliments, the subtle exclusions, the way she would change David's plans with me at the last minute. When they announced they were expecting their first child, I was overjoyed. I imagined becoming the grandmother I'd always dreamed of being, the one who baked cookies and told stories and created magical memories. Reality was different. Jessica controlled access to little Emma like a fortress guard. I could only visit on scheduled days, and even then I had to text 30 minutes before arriving. If I brought gifts, Jessica would inspect them with barely concealed disdain, often commenting that I didn't understand her parenting philosophy or that the toys weren't educational enough. When Emma turned 3 and started calling me by my first name instead of Grandma because Jessica insisted on it, something inside me cracked just a little bit more. David saw none of it, or perhaps he chose not to see. He was always so busy with work, so eager to please his wife, so convinced that any tension was just me being overly sensitive. Every time I tried to talk to him about how Jessica treated me, he would sigh and say things like, "Mom, you're being dramatic," or "Jessica's just particular about things," or my personal favorite, "Can't you two just get along for my sake?" So I stopped trying. I became smaller, quieter, more accommodating. I accepted the crumbs of affection Jessica allowed me to have with my granddaughter. I pretended not to notice when I wasn't included in family photos, or when Jessica would roll her eyes at my suggestions. I became a ghost in my own family, haunting the edges of their lives, grateful for whatever scraps of connection they threw my way. The catalyst came on a Saturday in late spring. David and Jessica were hosting a garden party to celebrate his promotion to senior partner. It was a big deal, with colleagues from his firm, Jessica's work friends, neighbors, and family all invited. Jessica had been planning it for weeks, hiring caterers, decorating the backyard with string lights and elegant table settings, making sure everything was Instagram perfect. I offered to help multiple times, but Jessica always had an excuse. "I've got it under control, Margaret," she'd say with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "You just show up and enjoy yourself." But there was always an undertone, a suggestion that my help would somehow ruin her perfect vision. On the day of the party, I spent 2 hours getting ready. I wore a floral dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, did my hair and makeup carefully, and even splurged on new shoes. I wanted to look nice for David, to show him how proud I was. I wanted to fit in, to not be an embarrassment. The party was already in full swing when I walked over from the guest house. The backyard looked beautiful, filled with laughter and conversation. I saw David near the barbecue, talking animatedly with some colleagues. Emma was running around with other children, her little sundress billowing as she played. Jessica stood near the beverage table, looking stunning in a white linen outfit that probably cost more than my monthly budget. I approached a group of David's colleagues I'd met once before, trying to join their conversation. They were polite but distant, and I felt that familiar awkwardness settling over me. I excused myself and wandered toward the food table, picking up a small plate and pretending to be very interested in the selection of appetizers. "Margaret, could you help me in the kitchen for a moment?" Jessica appeared beside me, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes hard. I followed her inside, setting down my untouched plate. The kitchen was a disaster of catering supplies and dirty dishes. Jessica gestured vaguely at the mess. "I need you to start washing these. The caterers are overwhelmed, and I can't have guests seeing this mess." My stomach dropped. "Oh, of course. I'm happy to help." "Good. And try to stay in here for a bit. David's colleagues don't really need to be bored with small talk from. She waved her hand dismissively and walked away before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, staring at the mountain of dishes, feeling that familiar sting of humiliation. But I rolled up my sleeves and started washing. This was how I could contribute, I told myself. This was how I could be useful. I was elbow deep in sudsy water when Emma ran into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. "Nana Margaret, come play with me and my friends. We're playing tag." My heart swelled. Emma rarely called me that anymore. "Oh, sweetie, I'm helping your mom right now. Maybe in a little bit. Please, just for a few minutes." I looked at the dishes, then at my granddaughter's eager face. "Okay, just for a few minutes." We went outside together, and Emma pulled me toward a group of children. I played along, laughing as they ran circles around me, feeling more alive than I had in months. For a brief moment, I forgot about Jessica's dismissiveness, about feeling invisible, about all the ways I'd been diminished. I was just a grandmother playing with her grandchild. That's when Jessica's voice cut through the laughter like a knife. "Margaret, what are you doing?" I turned to see her striding toward me, her face tight with anger. Several guests had stopped their conversations to watch. "I asked you to handle the kitchen. The dishes are still sitting there." "I know. I just thought I'd play with Emma for a few minutes. The children asked me to." "I don't care what the children asked. I gave you a job to do." Her voice was rising now, and more people were turning to look. My face burned with embarrassment. "Jessica, I'm sorry. I'll go back right now." "You know what your problem is?" She stepped closer, her voice dripping with condescension. "You can't follow simple instructions. You always have to do things your way, always have to insert yourself where you're not needed. I asked you to do one simple thing, and you can't even manage that." I felt tears prickling at my eyes. Around us, the party had gone quiet. I could see David making his way toward us, confusion on his face. Emma had stopped playing and was watching with wide eyes. "I just wanted to spend a few minutes with my granddaughter," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "Your granddaughter? She's my daughter. And frankly, Margaret, your constant hovering is exhausting. You're always underfoot, always trying to be involved when nobody wants you around. Can't you take a hint?" The words hit me like physical blows. I opened my mouth to respond, though I didn't know what I would say. My instinct was to apologize, to make myself smaller, to disappear. But before I could speak, Jessica took a step closer and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Just shut up, old lady. Go back to the kitchen where you belong and stop embarrassing my family." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen, feeling the stares of 40 guests burning into me. Tears spilled down my cheeks. David had reached us by then, looking shocked and uncertain. Emma's little face was crumpled with confusion and fear. Jessica seemed to realize she'd gone too far. She glanced around at the shocked faces, her own expression flickering between defiance and something that might have been regret. "I just meant," she started, but I didn't stay to hear the rest. I turned and walked away, moving as quickly as I could without running, desperate to escape the humiliation. I heard David call my name, but I didn't stop. I made it to the guest house, locked the door behind me, and collapsed on the couch, sobbing harder than I had since Richard's funeral. For hours I sat there in the growing darkness, replaying the moment over and over. The cruelty in Jessica's voice, the pity in the guests' eyes, the way David had just stood there, saying nothing, the look on Emma's face. But slowly, as the tears subsided and the shock wore off, something else began to bloom inside me. It started as a tiny spark of anger, so small I almost didn't recognize it. I'd spent 4 years swallowing my feelings, making excuses, accepting unacceptable treatment. I'd let myself become a doormat because I was so afraid of losing my connection to David and Emma. And where had that gotten me? Humiliated in front of dozens of people, treated like hired help in my own son's home, called an old lady and told to shut up like I was a misbehaving child. The anger grew, feeding on years of accumulated hurt. By the time the sun set completely, something had shifted inside me. I was done being small. I was done apologizing for existing. I was done letting fear keep me trapped in a situation that was slowly eroding my sense of self. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. "Mom, can we talk?" David's voice was hesitant. I didn't answer. I sat in the dark, listening to him knock a few more times before giving up and walking away. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my life. When had I become this person? This meek, apologetic woman who let others walk all over her? It certainly wasn't who I'd been when Richard was alive. Back then, I'd been confident, capable. I'd run my own small bookkeeping business, managed our household, had opinions and boundaries, but grief had hollowed me out, and fear of losing my only remaining family had kept me hollow. By the time dawn broke, I'd made a decision. I couldn't control how Jessica treated me. I couldn't force David to see what was happening, but I could control how I responded. I could decide what I would and wouldn't accept. I could choose to stop shrinking myself to fit into their lives. The next morning, I texted David. "We need to talk. Your house, 10 o'clock. I'll see you in the living room." He responded immediately. "Of course, Mom, I'm so sorry about yesterday. Jessica feels terrible." I didn't reply. At exactly 10 o'clock, I walked into their house without knocking. David and Jessica were both in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch. Jessica looked uncomfortable, her eyes red-rimmed. David looked worried. I didn't sit down. I stood in front of them, my hands clasped in front of me, and took a deep breath. "I need to say something, and I need you both to listen without interrupting." David started to speak, but I held up my hand. "No, you're going to listen. For 4 years, I've been quiet. I've accepted being treated like an inconvenience in my own son's life. I've swallowed every dismissive comment, every eye roll, every subtle and not so subtle message that I'm not wanted here. I did it because I was grieving, because I was afraid of being alone, because I thought that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself." Jessica opened her mouth, but I continued before she could speak. "Yesterday, you humiliated me in front of dozens of people. You called me an old lady and told me to shut up. You treated me like a servant, like someone whose only value is in being useful to you. And David, you stood there and said nothing." David's face flushed. "Mom, I was in shock. I didn't know what to say." "Then let me help you figure out what to say. You should have said, 'Jessica, that's my mother and you will not speak to her that way.' You should have defended me. You should have stood up for the woman who raised you, who loved you unconditionally, who sacrificed so much to give you a good life." Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice was steady. "I understand that Jessica is your wife. I understand that your loyalty is to her. But being loyal to your spouse doesn't mean allowing them to abuse your parent. It doesn't mean standing by while someone systematically dismantles your mother's dignity and self-worth." Jessica finally spoke, her voice small. "I'm sorry. I was stressed about the party, and I took it out on you. It was wrong." I turned to her. "You're right. It was wrong. But it wasn't just yesterday, Jessica. It's been 4 years of small cruelties. 4 years of making me feel unwelcome in my son's life. 4 years of controlling my access to my granddaughter like I'm some kind of threat. I never meant," she started. "I don't care what you meant. I care about what you did. And what you did was systematically push me to the margins of this family until I almost disappeared completely." The room was silent for a long moment. I could see David struggling with emotions he didn't know how to process. Jessica was crying quietly now, her carefully constructed facade cracking. I took another deep breath. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to find my own place to live, somewhere nearby but not on your property. I need my own space, my own life, separate from you." "Mom, no," David protested. "You don't have to leave. We'll work this out." "I'm not asking permission, David. I'm telling you what I've decided. I'll be out by the end of the month." "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. I've spent 4 years dependent on you, afraid to upset the balance. It's made me weak, and I won't be weak anymore." Jessica spoke up, her voice trembling. "I really am sorry, Margaret. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her for a long moment. "Do you know what the saddest part is? I actually believe you. I don't think you woke up every day planning to make me feel small. I think you just didn't see me as a full person. I was an inconvenience, an obligation, something to be managed. And I let you see me that way because I was so desperate to be part of this family that I accepted whatever scraps you threw me." "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "It was exactly like that, and I enabled it by never standing up for myself. So this is as much my fault as yours." David stood up, running his hands through his hair. "This is crazy. We're a family. We can work through this." "We are a family," I agreed. "But that doesn't mean I have to live in your backyard and accept being treated as less than. Family means respect, David. It means treating each other with basic human dignity. And that's been missing here." I moved toward the door, then turned back. "I love you, David. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. And Emma is my granddaughter, and I want to be part of her life. But it's going to be on different terms. I won't accept being sidelined anymore. I won't accept being spoken to like I'm worthless. And if that means I see you less, then that's what it means. I left them sitting there and walked back to the guest house. My hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through my body. I'd never spoken to David like that before. I'd never stood up to Jessica. Part of me wanted to run back and apologize, to smooth everything over, to return to the familiar pattern of making myself small. But I didn't. I sat down at my laptop and started searching for apartments. The next 2 weeks were a blur of apartment viewings, packing, and making arrangements. David tried several times to talk me out of leaving, but I remained firm. Jessica sent me a long text message apologizing and asking for a chance to make things right, but I didn't respond. I needed space, time to figure out who I was without constantly accommodating their needs and expectations. The apartment search itself became a journey of self-discovery. The first place I looked at was a small studio in a building that reminded me too much of a nursing home. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Patricia, kept emphasizing how it was perfect for seniors, with grab bars already installed and an emergency call system. I left feeling depressed, wondering if this was what my life had become. A series of compromises, settling for spaces designed for people who were just waiting to fade away. The second apartment was in a luxury building that David had suggested. It was beautiful, all marble countertops and stainless steel appliances, but the rent was astronomical. When I calculated the numbers, I realized I'd burned through my savings in less than 2 years. David had offered to help with the cost, but accepting his money felt like accepting his control. I wanted to stand on my own feet, even if that meant living more modestly. I looked at 7 more places over the next week. Some were too far from Emma. Others were in neighborhoods that felt unsafe. One had a landlord who made inappropriate comments about my age and whether I'd be able to handle the stairs. I left that viewing shaking with anger, not at him, but at myself for not saying anything, for just nodding politely and leaving. That night, I lay in the guest house bed and had a conversation with Richard. I'd been doing that more often lately, talking to him in my head, imagining what he'd say. "You would have told that landlord exactly where to shove his comments," I said into the darkness. "You never let anyone disrespect me. Why did I forget how to stand up for myself?" But I knew the answer. Grief had made me vulnerable. Fear of being alone had made me desperate. And that desperation had allowed people to treat me as less than I was worth. The apartment I eventually found was discovered almost by accident. I'd finished another disappointing viewing and decided to get coffee at a small cafe I'd noticed nearby. While waiting for my latte, I struck up a conversation with an older woman named Rosemary, who was reading a mystery novel I recognized. "Oh, I loved that book," I said, pointing to her paperback. "The twist at the end completely surprised me." Her face lit up. "Finally, someone who's read it. Everyone I know only watches the movies." We ended up talking for over an hour about books, life, and eventually, my apartment search. "You know," Rosemary said thoughtfully, "there's a unit that just opened up in my building. 1 bedroom, very reasonable rent. The last tenant was a teacher who got transferred to Boston. It's nothing fancy, but the building has character, and the neighbors are friendly. Would you like to see it?" That's how I found my apartment. It was on the 3rd floor of a 1970s building with worn carpets in the hallways, but beautiful hardwood floors inside the units. The kitchen was small but functional. The bathroom had vintage pink tiles that somehow felt charming rather than dated. And the living room had these enormous windows that flooded the space with natural light. But what sold me was the balcony. It was just big enough for a small table and 2 chairs, overlooking a courtyard where I could see other residents gardening, children playing, and neighbors chatting. It felt alive. It felt like a community, not just a building where people existed in isolated boxes. "I'll take it," I told the building manager, a kind man named Marcus who reminded me of my late brother. He smiled. "Don't you want to think about it? See a few more places?" "No," I said firmly. "This is the one." Signing the lease felt momentous. My hand shook slightly as I wrote my name, but not from fear, from excitement, from the realization that I was choosing something for myself, based solely on what I wanted, not on what would be convenient for others or what would avoid conflict. The day after I signed the lease, David showed up at the guest house with coffee and bagels. He looked tired, older somehow. We sat at the small kitchen table, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I don't want you to go," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know. Jessica's been a mess. She's barely sleeping. She keeps saying she's ruined everything." I took a sip of my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "David, I need you to understand something. This isn't about punishing Jessica. This isn't even really about her, though what she did was the catalyst. This is about me reclaiming my life. For 4 years, I've lived in limbo. Not really part of your family, but not separate either. I need my own space. I need to remember who I am outside of being your mother or Emma's grandmother. But you could do that here. We could give you more space, more privacy. We could set better boundaries. No, I said gently. We couldn't. Because as long as I'm living in your backyard, there will always be that imbalance. I'll always be the guest, always dependent, always careful not to overstep. I need to not be careful for a while. I need to be loud and messy and take up space without worrying about inconveniencing anyone. David's eyes filled with tears. I failed you, Mom. I should have protected you from Jessica's behavior. I should have seen what was happening. You were in an impossible position, I said, reaching across to squeeze his hand. But yes, you should have done better. And now you know that. And now you can choose to do better going forward. How? He asked, his voice breaking. How do I do better when you're not even going to be here? You visit me. You call me. You don't let Jessica dictate the terms of our relationship anymore. You stand up for me when she says something dismissive, even in small ways. You show Emma that treating people with respect matters more than keeping the peace. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I can do that. I will do that. We finished our coffee in more comfortable silence. As he was leaving, he turned back. Mom, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I know that probably sounds weird coming from me, but I am. After he left, I continued packing. Each item I wrapped and boxed felt symbolic. Richard's favorite coffee mug that I couldn't bear to part with. The photo albums documenting David's childhood. My grandmother's recipe box with cards written in her spidery handwriting. Books I'd been meaning to read but never found time for. Each object represented a piece of my history, my identity, who I'd been before grief and fear had diminished me. I found things I'd forgotten I had. A journal from my 20s, full of ambitious dreams and confident declarations. A certificate from a business course I'd taken. Photos of me with old friends, laughing, vibrant, fully present. I sat on the floor surrounded by these artifacts of my former self and cried. Not sad tears, but tears of recognition. That woman was still in here somewhere. I just needed to give her permission to exist again. The night before moving day, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the guest house, touching surfaces, remembering moments. Not all of them had been bad. There were mornings when Emma had run over in her pajamas to have breakfast with me. Evenings when David had stopped by just to chat. Even a few times when Jessica and I had managed to have pleasant conversations about gardening or a book we'd both read. But the good moments didn't erase the constant underlying tension, the feeling of walking on eggshells, the way I'd learned to make myself smaller and quieter with each passing month. I was making the right choice. I knew that in my bones. Moving day arrived with surprising warmth for early June. David came with a rental truck, and to my surprise, he'd brought 2 of his colleagues from the firm to help with the heavy lifting. Young men in their 30s who treated me with easy respect, joking and chatting as they carried boxes and furniture. One of them, a guy named Marcus, asked about my book collection as he carried a particularly heavy box. You've got great taste, he said, nodding at the spines visible through the open top. My mom loves mystery novels too. She'd probably want to steal your entire collection. It was such a small thing, but it meant something. Being seen as a person with interests and opinions, not just as someone's elderly mother to be tolerated. Jessica came out as we were loading the last few items. She looked terrible, her usually perfect appearance marred by dark circles under her eyes and unwashed hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Emma clung to her leg, unusually quiet. Margaret, Jessica started, her voice hoarse. Can we talk? Just for a minute? I glanced at David, who was securing a rope around my dresser. He nodded almost imperceptibly. I followed Jessica to a quiet corner of the driveway. I know you probably don't want to hear this, she began, tears already forming in her eyes. But I need to say it anyway. What I did at the party was unforgivable. But more than that, the way I've treated you for years was unforgivable. I've been thinking a lot about why I did it, and I think I was threatened by you. Threatened by me? I couldn't hide my surprise. David talks about you with such love and respect. Even when you were just quietly existing in the background, he would mention things you'd taught him, values you'd instilled. And Emma adores you, even though I tried to limit your influence. I think part of me was jealous. My own mother was cold and critical. She never made me feel loved the way you clearly made David feel. And instead of being grateful that my daughter had a loving grandmother, I tried to sabotage it. She wiped her eyes roughly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. And I'm going to work on being better, whether you're here to witness it or not. I stood there, processing her words. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to say it was okay, to slip back into the pattern of making everything easier for everyone else. But I stopped myself. I appreciate you telling me this, I said carefully, and I believe that you mean it. But Jessica, I need you to understand that recognizing what you did is just the first step. Changing your behavior, consistently, over time, that's what matters. And I need to see that change before I can fully trust you again. She nodded, more tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand. I do. And Margaret, I hope someday you can forgive me. Not for my sake, but so you're not carrying around anger that hurts you. It was perhaps the most emotionally intelligent thing I'd ever heard her say. Emma suddenly broke free from where she'd been hovering nearby and ran to me, wrapping her small arms around my legs. Don't go, Nana Margaret. I knelt down, pulling her into a proper hug. Sweet girl, I'm not going far, just 15 minutes away. And you know what? You can come visit me anytime you want. We'll have special Nana days, just you and me. Promise. Her little face was so earnest, so worried. I promise. In fact, how about this weekend? You can help me unpack my kitchen and we'll make cookies together. Would you like that? Her face brightened immediately. Can we make the chocolate ones with the chips? We can make any kind you want. As I stood up, I caught Jessica watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pain, maybe, or regret, or perhaps the beginning of understanding. The drive to my new apartment took only 12 minutes, but it felt like crossing into a different world. We unloaded everything in just under 2 hours, thanks to David's colleagues and their youthful energy. By early afternoon, my belongings were stacked in their respective rooms, ready to be unpacked and organized. After everyone left and I was alone in my new space for the first time, I stood in the center of the living room and just breathed. The silence was different from the silence in the guest house. There, quiet had felt oppressive, loaded with tension and unspoken expectations. Here, it felt peaceful, mine. I spent the rest of the day unpacking slowly, deliberately, making choices about where everything would go. The coffee maker on the left side of the counter, because I'm right-handed. My favorite reading chair positioned to catch the afternoon light. Photos arranged on the bookshelf, but different ones than I'd displayed before. Not just family photos, but pictures of me with friends, me at my college graduation, me and Richard on our honeymoon looking impossibly young and happy. That evening, as the sun set and painted my new living room in shades of orange and pink, Rosemary knocked on my door with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Welcome to the building," she said with a warm smile. "I thought you might like some company on your first night, or if you prefer to be alone, I completely understand." I surprised myself by stepping aside and welcoming her in. We sat on my balcony, watching the courtyard below slowly empty as families went inside for dinner, and we talked. About books, about life, about her late husband who died 10 years ago, about my recent widowhood and the complicated situation with my family. "You did the right thing," Rosemary said firmly when I finished explaining. "I did something similar when my daughter tried to put me in assisted living because it would be more convenient. I was only 68, perfectly capable of living independently, but she kept talking about how worried she was, how much easier it would be if I was somewhere with staff. What she meant was it would be easier for her not to feel guilty about rarely visiting. What did you do?" I told her absolutely not, that I would decide when and if I needed that level of care. She was furious, accused me of being stubborn and difficult. We didn't speak for almost 6 months. Rosemary took a sip of wine, her eyes distant with memory. But eventually, she came around. "Realized that treating me like a burden wasn't the same as loving me. Our relationship is better now than it's ever been because I set that boundary." Her words resonated deeply. Setting boundaries wasn't about being difficult or unloving. It was about having enough respect for yourself to demand respect from others. That night, I slept in my own bed, in my own apartment, and for the first time in 4 years, I didn't wake up with that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. Moving day was emotional. David helped me carry boxes, his face tight with suppressed feelings. Emma came too, asking why Nana Margaret was leaving. I knelt down to her level and told her, "I'm not leaving you, sweetie. I'm just getting my own place nearby. You can come visit me anytime you want." "Why don't you want to live here anymore?" she asked, her big eyes confused. I glanced at David, who was watching us anxiously. Sometimes grown-ups need their own space, even when they love each other very much. I'll still see you all the time. After everything was moved in and David had left, I stood in the middle of my new living room, surrounded by boxes, and felt something unfamiliar. It took me a moment to recognize it. Freedom. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't have to worry about running into Jessica and seeing that look of barely concealed irritation. I didn't have to carefully time my movements to avoid being in the way. I didn't have to apologize for existing. I spent the next few days unpacking and settling in. I arranged furniture, hung pictures, set up my small kitchen exactly how I wanted it. I bought fresh flowers for the dining table and new curtains for the bedroom. Each decision I made, each choice about where to put things, felt like a small act of reclamation. About a week after I moved in, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Jessica standing there, holding a potted plant and looking nervous. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in, looking around the apartment with an expression I couldn't quite read. "It's nice," she said finally. "Very you." We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Finally, I gestured to the couch. "Do you want to sit?" She nodded, and we both sat down, maintaining careful distance between us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Jessica began, setting the plant on the coffee table. "About what you said, about how I've treated you. And you were right." I didn't say anything, just waited for her to continue. "I think I saw you as competition," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "For David's attention, for Emma's affection. My own mother and I have a difficult relationship. She was critical and controlling when I was growing up, always finding fault with everything I did. When I met David and you, I think I brought all that baggage with me." "That's not an excuse," I said carefully. "No, it's not. It's an explanation, but not an excuse. I took my issues with my mother out on you, and that was completely unfair. You're not her. You never were." I felt something softening inside me, but I held onto my boundaries. "I appreciate you saying that, but Jessica, apologies aren't enough. I need to see actual change." She nodded, tears starting to fall. "I know, and I understand if you don't trust me. I wouldn't trust me either, but I want to try. I want to do better." "Why?" I asked bluntly. "Why now? Is it because David's upset? Because you're worried about how it looks?" She was quiet for a long moment, wiping her eyes. "Emma asked me why I was so mean to you. She's 5 years old, and she could see it. That moment at the party, when she saw me yell at you like that, something in her little face broke my heart. She's been having nightmares about it." My chest tightened. "I didn't know that. She keeps dreaming that I'm yelling at her the same way." It made me realize what kind of example I'm setting, what kind of person I'm teaching her to be. Jessica looked at me directly. "I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking it's okay to treat people the way I treated you." We sat in silence for a while. I could feel the weight of the moment, the potential for something to shift. But I'd learned something important in the last few weeks. I couldn't control whether Jessica changed. I couldn't force her to treat me with respect. I could only control my own boundaries and responses. "I appreciate you coming here and saying this," I told her honestly, "and I'm willing to see if things can be different. But Jessica, I meant what I said. I won't accept being treated that way anymore. If you slip back into old patterns, I'll distance myself. Not as punishment, but as self-preservation." She nodded vigorously. "I understand. Completely. And I want to see Emma regularly. Not on a controlled schedule where I have to ask permission and give advance notice. She's my granddaughter, and I want a real relationship with her. Yes, absolutely. You're right. I was too controlling about that. I think I was afraid she'd love you more than me." Jessica laughed bitterly. "Which is ridiculous and insecure, I know. It's human," I said gently. "We all have insecurities, but we can't let them hurt the people around us." She stood up to leave, then paused at the door. "Margaret, I really am sorry. Not just for the party, but for everything. For making you feel unwelcome in David's life. For all the little ways I pushed you aside. You deserved so much better." After she left, I sat on my couch for a long time, processing the conversation. Part of me wanted to believe that everything would be different now, that one honest conversation had fixed years of damage. But I'd lived long enough to know that real change takes time. People don't transform overnight, no matter how sincere their apologies. But I also felt something that had been absent for a long time. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would be perfect, but realistic hope that things could improve, that relationships could heal, even if they'd never be perfect. Over the following weeks, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I joined a book club at the local library and rediscovered my love of reading and discussion. I started volunteering at a community center that offered free tax preparation services for seniors, putting my old bookkeeping skills to use. I made new friends, women my age who'd been through their own struggles and transformations. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Chen, recommended by a woman in my book club. In our first session, I told her about the years of accommodation, the humiliation at the party, my decision to move out. What would you say was the turning point? Dr. Chen asked. The moment you decided you couldn't continue as before? I thought about it carefully. It was when Jessica told me to shut up in front of everyone, but it wasn't just that moment. It was the accumulation of every small dismissal, every time I made myself smaller, every time I swallowed my feelings. That moment at the party was just the final drop that made the glass overflow. And how do you feel now? Scared, I admitted, but also stronger. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again, like I'm allowed to take up space. Dr. Chen nodded, making a note on her pad. Tell me about your life before Richard died. Who were you then? The question caught me off guard. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to remember that version of myself. I was confident, I said slowly. I ran my own bookkeeping business from home. Small clients, mostly local businesses, but it was mine. I had opinions about politics, about books, about everything. Richard and I would debate for hours about silly things. He used to joke that I could argue the sky into being green if I wanted to. And what happened to that woman? Tears filled my eyes. She died with Richard. Or maybe she didn't die, but she went into hiding. When he had his heart attack, it was so sudden. One morning he was laughing at breakfast, talking about plans for our retirement trip to Italy. By that afternoon, he was gone. The doctor said it was massive, that he probably didn't suffer. But I suffered. Oh God, did I suffer. I paused, wiping my eyes. Dr. Chen waited patiently, not rushing me. For months I was just frozen. People kept saying that time heals, that I'd feel better eventually, but I didn't believe them. Richard wasn't just my husband. He was my best friend, my sounding board, my anchor. Without him, I felt like I was floating in space with nothing to hold on to. When David suggested I move closer to him, it felt like a lifeline. I thought being near family would fill some of that terrible emptiness. But it didn't? No, it just created a different kind of emptiness. Instead of being alone with my grief, I was surrounded by people who made me feel alone anyway. At least before, I had my own space, my memories, my autonomy. In the guest house, I had none of those things. I was perpetually waiting for permission to exist. Over the following weeks, my sessions with Dr. Chen became an anchor point in my week. She helped me see patterns I'd been blind to, how I'd confused accommodation with love, how my fear of abandonment had made me accept unacceptable treatment, how grief had stripped away my sense of self, leaving me vulnerable to people who were happy to define me on their terms. You've talked a lot about what you've lost, Dr. Chen said in our fourth session. Your husband, your business, your confidence, your sense of self. But I want to try something different today. I want you to tell me what you've gained. Gained? I looked at her incredulously. I haven't gained anything. I've been humiliated and displaced and— Humor me, she interrupted gently. Since moving into your apartment, what's different? What's better? I thought about it. I sleep through the night now. I didn't realize how anxious I'd been, constantly listening for sounds from the main house, wondering if Jessica was angry about something, if David needed me. Now I sleep in complete silence, and it's glorious. What else? I've been cooking again, real cooking, not just heating up leftovers. Yesterday I made this complicated Thai curry that took 2 hours. I never would have done that in the guest house because Jessica would have found some way to make a comment about the smell or how I was monopolizing the kitchen or something. But in my apartment, I can cook whatever I want. And I've been reading. Really reading, not just skimming articles on my phone. I joined that book club, and it turns out I have a lot of opinions about literature. Last week we were discussing a novel about a woman leaving her marriage, and I got into this passionate debate with another member about whether the protagonist was brave or selfish. And it felt so good to care about something that much, to have an opinion and defend it. Dr. Chen smiled. So you've gained sleep, creativity, intellectual engagement, and the freedom to have opinions. That's not nothing, Margaret. She was right. In focusing on what had been taken from me, I'd missed what I was reclaiming. In our 6th session, Dr. Chen introduced me to something she called the should exercise. I want you to pay attention to how often you use the word should when thinking about yourself. Should do this, should be that way, should feel a certain way. Every time you notice a should, I want you to ask yourself, According to whom? That week, I became hyper-aware of my internal dialogue. I should call David and smooth things over. According to whom? The old Margaret who avoided conflict at all costs. I should feel guilty about setting boundaries with Jessica. According to whom? Society's expectation that women always be accommodating and selfless. I should be over Richard's death by now. According to whom? People who've never experienced that kind of loss. It was revelatory. So many of my shoulds weren't based on my actual values or needs, but on external expectations I'd internalized without questioning. I brought this realization to my next session. I've been living my life according to other people's shoulds, I told Dr. Chen. No wonder I feel like I've lost myself. I've been performing a version of Margaret that everyone else wanted, not being the Margaret I actually am. So who is the Margaret you actually are? I thought about it for a long moment. She's someone who has strong opinions and isn't afraid to voice them. She's someone who values her own time and energy. She's someone who can love people deeply without sacrificing herself completely. She's someone who's been through tremendous pain and came out the other side still capable of joy. That sounds like someone worth being, Dr. Chen said softly. One session that particularly stuck with me happened about 2 months into therapy. Dr. Chen asked me to describe my relationship with my own mother, something we hadn't talked about much before. My mother was wonderful, I said automatically. She was warm, loving, always there for us. Tell me a specific memory. I thought about it, expecting warm scenes to flood back. Instead, I remembered tension. Actually, my mother was a lot like I became with Jessica. Always accommodating, always trying to keep the peace. My father was difficult, demanding. He expected dinner on the table at exactly 6 o'clock. He wanted the house quiet when he came home from work. He made all the major decisions about money, about where we lived, about everything, really. And your mother? She went along with it. She'd shush us kids if we were too loud. She'd rush around to have everything perfect before he got home. I remember once she'd been sick all day with the flu, but she still dragged herself out of bed to make his favorite roast because it was Tuesday, and that's what he expected on Tuesdays. How did you feel about that? I thought it was normal. I thought that's what love looked like. Sacrifice and accommodation and making yourself smaller so the other person could be comfortable. I paused, the realization hitting me. Oh my God, I've been repeating my mother's pattern. It's very common, Dr. Chen said. We learn how to be in relationships by watching our parents, and sometimes we absorb lessons we don't consciously recognize until much later. My mother died when I was 35. Cancer. And I remember visiting her in the hospital near the end, and she was still worried about my father. Whether he was eating properly, whether he was managing the house okay. Even dying, she was still taking care of him. Did you want that kind of relationship for yourself? No, I said firmly. Richard and I had something different. We were partners. We took care of each other. He never expected me to shrink myself for him. I felt tears coming. That's why losing him was so devastating. He was the one person who always saw me, the real me, and loved what he saw. And after he died, you reverted to the pattern you learned from your mother. Yes, because it felt safe, familiar. If I made myself useful, accommodating, unthreatening, then maybe people wouldn't leave me. But it doesn't actually work that way, does it? No, Dr. Chen said gently. It doesn't. People who genuinely love you want you to be authentic, not diminished. And the ones who require you to be small aren't people whose love is worth having. These therapy sessions became a crucial part of my transformation. They gave me language for experiences I'd never been able to articulate. They helped me see patterns, make connections, understand the roots of behaviors that had become automatic. And slowly, session by session, I felt myself becoming more solid, more grounded in my own sense of self. Meanwhile, my relationship with David and Jessica slowly began to shift. True to her word, Jessica started making changes. She invited me to family dinners without making me feel like an obligation. She asked for my opinion on things and actually listened to my answers. When I came to visit Emma, she didn't hover or micromanage, giving us space to have our own relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, times when I could see Jessica struggling against her old instincts. But she was trying, genuinely trying, and I respected that effort. David and I had several difficult conversations. He apologized for not standing up for me, for being so focused on keeping peace that he'd enabled the imbalance. He admitted that he'd been afraid to confront Jessica, worried about causing conflict in his marriage. I failed you, Mom, he said one evening over coffee in my apartment. I should have been a better son. You were in a difficult position, I told him. But David, You need to understand something. Being a good husband doesn't mean allowing your wife to mistreat your mother. And being a good son means standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. I know that now, he said quietly. I just wish I'd figured it out sooner. My relationship with Emma flourished once Jessica loosened her grip. I started having her over to my apartment for sleepovers, something that would have been unthinkable before. We'd make cookies together, watch movies, read stories. She started calling me Nana again without being prompted, and the sound of it never failed to make my heart swell. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 months after I'd moved out, Emma and I were baking chocolate chip cookies in my little kitchen. She was standing on a stool, carefully measuring flour, her tongue poking out in concentration. Nana? She said suddenly. Yes, sweetie? I'm glad you have your own house now. I paused in the middle of cracking an egg. You are? Why's that? She looked up at me with those solemn 5-year-old eyes. Because now when I visit you, it feels special. Like I'm going to a fun place just for me and you. I knelt down next to her stool, pulling her into a hug. Do you know what? I feel the same way. And Mommy is nicer now, she added matter-of-factly. She doesn't get that angry face when we talk about you. Out of the mouths of babes, children see so much more than we give them credit for. Around the same time, I started dating. It felt strange at first, like I was betraying Richard's memory. But Dr. Chen helped me understand that honoring Richard's memory didn't mean freezing my life in place. He would have wanted me to be happy, to continue living fully. The idea of dating at 62 terrified me. What did I even have to offer? My body wasn't what it used to be. I had wrinkles, gray hair I'd stopped bothering to dye, and a closet full of practical clothing rather than anything fashionable or seductive. The thought of trying to navigate dating apps made me want to hide under my bed. But life had other plans. I met Gerald through the community center where I volunteered. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early September, and I was helping an elderly gentleman named Howard with his tax forms. The community center offered free assistance to seniors, and I'd been volunteering there for about a month, putting my old bookkeeping skills to good use. Howard was getting frustrated with the paperwork when a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes approached our table. Having trouble with the capital gain section, Howard? Those forms are brutal. Howard brightened immediately. Gerald, thank God. This woman's trying her best, but I think I need someone who speaks fluent IRS. I should have been offended, but Gerald's apologetic smile was so genuine that I found myself laughing instead. Please, by all means. I think I've confused us both at this point. Gerald sat down and within 10 minutes had sorted out Howard's confusion with patient explanations and clear examples. I watched, impressed by his teaching style. He didn't make Howard feel stupid for not understanding. He just made the complex simple. After Howard left, clutching his properly filed forms like a trophy, Gerald turned to me. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I used to teach high school history before I retired, and I've done these tax forms so many times I could probably fill them out in my sleep. No apology necessary. You saved both of us from certain doom. I'm Margaret. Gerald, and I saw you here last week too. Are you new to volunteering? We fell into easy conversation. He told me about his late wife, Patricia, who died from ovarian cancer 3 years ago, about his 2 adult children who lived in California and Oregon, far enough away that he saw them only a few times a year, about his love of history and how retirement was both freeing and occasionally lonely. I found myself sharing my own story. Not everything, not yet, but enough. About Richard's sudden death, my complicated relationship with my son and daughter-in-law, my recent decision to move into my own place and reclaim my independence. Good for you, Gerald said when I finished. It takes courage to start over, especially after loss. Most people just settle into their pain and make a home there. Is that what you did? I asked, then immediately regretted the boldness. I'm sorry. That's too personal. No, it's a fair question. And yes, for a while I did exactly that. For about a year after Patricia died, I barely left the house except for necessities. Our kids kept calling, worried, suggesting I move to a retirement community, or closer to one of them, but I wasn't ready. What changed? One morning, I woke up and realized Patricia would have been furious with me. She was this incredibly vibrant person, always dragging me to gallery openings or community theater productions or new restaurants. The idea that her death would turn me into a hermit would have infuriated her. He smiled at the memory. So I started forcing myself out, first just to the grocery store and library. Then I joined this volunteer program, started going to lectures at the community college, slowly built a life that wasn't just about missing her. His honesty touched something deep in me. I'm trying to do the same thing, Build a life that honors Richard's memory without being defined by his absence. That's a beautiful way to put it. We started having coffee after our volunteer shifts. Just an hour or so, sitting in the small cafe attached to the community center, talking about everything and nothing. Books we were reading, news stories that frustrated or inspired us, memories of our respective spouses that we could share without the awkwardness that often came when talking to people who hadn't experienced loss. Gerald had a dry wit that caught me off guard. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into our friendship, we were discussing a particularly pompous volunteer coordinator who'd lectured us all about proper procedures. I kept waiting for him to break into song, Gerald said. You know, something from Les Miserables. Do you hear the people singing the songs of proper tax form protocol? I laughed so hard I snorted coffee, which made Gerald laugh, which made me laugh harder. It was the first time since Richard's death that I'd laughed until my stomach hurt. The first time joy had felt uncomplicated. Our friendship deepened gradually, organically. He started recommending books to me, and I discovered he had impeccable taste. I introduced him to my book club, and he fit right in, offering thoughtful perspectives without dominating the conversation. We started going to matinee movies together, splitting popcorn and debating the films afterward over dinner at the diner near the theater. It was Emma who first called him my boyfriend. She'd come over for one of our Saturday baking days, and Gerald had stopped by to drop off a book he'd mentioned. Emma had answered the door, her hands covered in cookie dough, and announced, "Nana Margaret, your boyfriend is here." Gerald and I had looked at each other, both blushing like teenagers. After he left, I gently corrected Emma. "Sweetie, Gerald's my friend, not my boyfriend. But you smile different when he's here," she said with 5-year-old certainty. "You smile with your whole face." Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. That conversation got me thinking. What was Gerald to me? I enjoyed his company. I looked forward to our time together. I'd started dressing a bit more carefully on days I knew I'd see him, choosing colors that flattered rather than just throwing on whatever was clean. When something funny or interesting happened, he was often the first person I wanted to tell. Was I developing feelings for him? And more importantly, was that okay? I brought it up in therapy. "I think I might be interested in someone," I told Dr. Chen, "but I feel guilty, like I'm betraying Richard." "Tell me about the guilt." Richard and I were married for 35 years. We built a life together. We were supposed to grow old together. And here I am, only 4 years after his death, thinking about another man. It feels disloyal. Margaret, if you had died instead of Richard, would you want him to spend the rest of his life alone? The question stopped me cold. No, of course not. I'd want him to be happy. Then why don't you deserve the same consideration? It seemed so obvious when she said it, but it hadn't felt obvious to me. I'd been carrying this assumption that loving Richard meant never loving anyone else, that moving forward meant leaving him behind. But that wasn't true. Richard was part of my history, part of who I'd become. Nothing could change that. And choosing to open my heart to someone new didn't diminish what Richard and I had shared. Armed with this clarity, I paid more attention to my feelings for Gerald. And once I stopped fighting them, they became impossible to ignore. The way my heart sped up when I saw him, the warmth that spread through me when he smiled, the comfort of his presence, the ease of our conversations, the growing desire to know everything about him. One evening in late October, we were walking through the park near my apartment after a particularly good movie. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, and there was a pleasant chill in the air that made me grateful for my sweater. "Margaret," Gerald said suddenly, stopping on the path. "I need to tell you something, and I'm terrified it might ruin our friendship." My heart started pounding. "Okay, I've developed feelings for you, more than friendship feelings, and I understand if that's not something you're interested in. We can absolutely continue as friends if that's what you prefer. But I'm 70 years old, and I've learned that life's too short not to be honest about important things." I stood there, looking at this kind, patient man who made me laugh and challenged me intellectually, and never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. This man who'd listened to hours of stories about Richard without jealousy, who'd supported my journey of reclaiming myself without trying to shape me into what he wanted. "I have feelings for you too," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of losing someone again. Of opening my heart and having it broken. Of comparing you to Richard and that not being fair to either of you. Of my family's reaction. Of being a 62-year-old woman who doesn't know how to date." Gerald stepped closer, taking my hand gently. "Those are all valid fears. And I can't promise you won't experience loss again, because that's part of loving anyone. But Margaret, You've already been through the worst thing that can happen. You've survived losing your life partner. You've rebuilt yourself from that grief. You're one of the strongest people I've met. I don't feel strong, but you are. You set boundaries with your family even though it terrified you. You moved out and built your own life. You're doing the hard work of therapy. You're volunteering and making new friends and reading challenging books. That's all strength. And as for dating, we're both figuring this out as we go. There's no rule book for romance at our age. I looked at our joined hands, his large and weathered, mine smaller but equally marked by time and experience. I'd like to try, I said finally, to see where this goes. But slowly. I need slow. His smile was radiant. Slow is perfect. Slow is exactly my speed. When I introduced Gerald to David and Jessica at a family dinner, I watched carefully for signs of the old Jessica, the one who would have found ways to subtly undermine my happiness. But she was warm and welcoming, genuinely interested in getting to know him. David seemed a bit awkward, adjusting to seeing his mother with someone who wasn't his father, but he was polite and kind. Emma, of course, won Gerald over immediately by showing him her collection of stuffed animals and insisting he needed to know all their names and backstories. After dinner, as Gerald and I were leaving, Jessica pulled me aside. "He seems really nice, Margaret. I'm happy for you." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much her approval meant to me. "I mean it. You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who treats you well." She paused, then added, "I'm glad you didn't let what I did keep you from living your life." It was moments like these that showed me how much had changed. The old Jessica would never have acknowledged her role in my unhappiness. The old me would never have been confident enough to pursue my own happiness, regardless of her approval. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. I woke up each morning without that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. I didn't spend my days anticipating criticism or bracing for conflict. I made decisions based on what I wanted, not on what would keep the peace or make others comfortable. I also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with after Richard died, and I moved. Phone calls turned into video chats turned into visits. I planned a week-long trip to visit my college roommate in Arizona, something I never would have done when I was living in the guest house, always available for whatever David and Jessica might need. One evening, about 6 months after the incident at the party, I was having dinner at David and Jessica's house. It was Emma's 6th birthday, a small family celebration. As we sat around the table, Emma with frosting on her face, David and Jessica laughing at something Gerald had said, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Not gratitude for the humiliation that had catalyzed my transformation. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. But gratitude for finding the strength to change, for refusing to accept being diminished, for choosing myself when it felt impossibly hard to do so. After Emma was in bed and the others were having coffee in the living room, Jessica found me in the kitchen, putting away the last of the birthday dishes. "Let me help," she said, grabbing a dish towel. We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Jessica spoke. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry, Margaret, for all of it, and I'm grateful that you gave me a chance to be better." I paused, my hands in the warm dishwater. "I didn't give you a chance, Jessica. I gave myself a chance to stop accepting unacceptable treatment. What you did with that was up to you." She considered this, drying a plate slowly. "You're right. I guess I'm grateful you didn't write me off completely, that you let me show you I could change. We all deserve chances to grow," I said. "But the person we need to change for is ourselves, not others." "When did you get so wise?" she asked with a slight smile. I laughed. "I'm not wise. I'm just someone who finally got tired of being afraid." Later that night, lying in my own bed in my own apartment, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. From the humiliation at the party to this moment of peace and genuine connection with my family. It hadn't been a straight line. There had been setbacks, difficult conversations, moments when I'd wanted to slip back into old patterns because they were familiar and safe, but I'd learned something crucial. Safety and peace aren't the same thing. I'd been safe in my accommodation, in my silence, in my smallness, but I hadn't been at peace. Real peace came from living authentically, from treating myself with the same dignity and respect I afforded others. I thought about the Margaret who had stood at that party, tears streaming down her face, feeling like the smallest person in the world. I wished I could go back and tell her what I knew now, that this moment, as painful as it was, would be the beginning of reclaiming herself, that she was stronger than she knew, that she deserved so much better than what she was accepting. But maybe I didn't need to go back. Maybe she'd figured it out on her own. In that moment when shock gave way to anger, when anger gave way to determination. Maybe the seeds of transformation were planted in that very instant of humiliation. A few months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I was having coffee with Gerald on my balcony when my phone rang. It was David. "Hey, Mom, are you free this afternoon? Emma's school is having a grandparents' day, and she specifically asked if you could come." "Of course," I said immediately. "What time?" 2 o'clock. "And Mom?" "Jessica and I were talking, and we were wondering if you and Gerald would like to come over for Thanksgiving. Nothing fancy, just family." I felt that familiar tug of emotion. "We'd love to." After hanging up, I sat there for a moment, feeling the cool breeze, the warmth of the coffee cup in my hands, Gerald's comfortable presence beside me. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's good," I said, and I meant it. That afternoon, I sat in Emma's classroom surrounded by other grandparents, watching her proudly show off her artwork and introduce me to her teacher. "This is my Nana Margaret," she said, beaming. "She's the best cookie baker in the whole world." As I looked at her shining face, at David smiling from the back of the room where Jessica stood beside him, her hand in his, I realized something profound. The journey from humiliation to healing hadn't just transformed me, it had transformed all of us. By refusing to stay small, I'd given Jessica permission to be better. By standing up for myself, I'd shown David what real respect looked like. By creating boundaries, I'd made space for healthier relationships. And by choosing my own happiness, I'd modeled for Emma that her worth wasn't dependent on making others comfortable. The path forward wouldn't always be smooth. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. But I was no longer the woman who would silence herself to keep the peace. I was someone who knew her own worth, who could love without abandoning herself, who could be generous without being a doormat. That evening, Gerald and I walked through the park near my apartment, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet. He was telling me about a book he was reading, animated and enthusiastic. I listened, not because I felt obligated to, but because I genuinely enjoyed his company. "You seem happy," he observed, pausing in his story to look at me. "I am," I said, surprising myself with the simplicity and truth of it. "I really am." "Good. You deserve to be." Those words, so simple, meant everything, because I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. I did deserve to be happy. I deserved respect, consideration, love that didn't require me to shrink. And I didn't need anyone else's permission to claim those things for myself. As we walked on, I thought about the woman I'd been before that fateful Saturday in spring. The one who apologized for existing, who accepted scraps and called it love, who was slowly fading into invisibility. She seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. But I also felt compassion for her. She'd been doing the best she could with what she knew. She'd been operating from fear and grief, trying to hold on to connection any way she could. She'd needed to hit bottom before she could rise. And rise she did. We did. I did. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was a series of small choices, daily decisions to honor myself, to maintain boundaries, to choose authenticity over accommodation. It was learning to sit with discomfort rather than immediately trying to fix it. It was understanding that conflict isn't always bad, that sometimes things need to fall apart before they can come together in a healthier way. Most importantly, it was learning that I was enough. Not because of what I did for others, not because of how useful I could be, not because I made myself small enough to fit into the spaces others left for me. I was enough simply because I existed, because I was human, because my feelings and needs mattered just as much as anyone else's. This truth, once internalized, changed everything. A year after the incident that changed my life, David asked me to coffee, just the two of us. We sat in a quiet cafe, the morning sun streaming through the windows, and he said, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how we treated you, how I let Jessica treat you." "David," I started, but he held up his hand. "Please, let me finish. I was embarrassed, Mom. Embarrassed that my wife spoke to you that way. Embarrassed that I didn't defend you. Embarrassed that it took you moving out for me to see how bad things had gotten. But I'm also grateful." "Grateful?" "Yeah, because you showed me what it looks like to stand up for yourself, to refuse to accept less than you deserve." Jessica and I have been in couples counseling, and one of the things we've been working on is healthy conflict and boundaries. Your example started that process. I felt tears prickling my eyes. I'm proud of you for doing that work. I want to be the kind of husband who treats my wife well, but also the kind of son who stands up for his mother, the kind of father who shows Emma what respect looks like. And I couldn't be any of those things when I was so focused on avoiding conflict that I enabled bad behavior. He reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for being brave enough to demand better. In that moment, I understood something crucial. My transformation hadn't just been about me. It had rippled outward, affecting everyone in my orbit. By refusing to accept mistreatment, I'd forced those around me to examine their own behavior. By choosing myself, I'd given others permission to do the same. As I drove home from coffee with David, I thought about the journey of the past year, from the depths of humiliation to this place of peace and authenticity. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments when I'd wanted to give up, to go back to the familiar patterns of accommodation. But I'd pushed through, and on the other side was a life I'd never imagined possible. I thought about all the women who, like me, make themselves small, who apologize for existing, who accept crumbs and call it love, who lose themselves in the process of trying to maintain connection. I wished I could tell each of them what I'd learned, that they deserve better, that it's never too late to change, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. But I also knew that each person has to come to that realization in their own time, through their own journey. I couldn't have heard these truths before I was ready. I needed to hit rock bottom, to feel the full weight of my own diminishment, before I could find the strength to rise. Now, as I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, I felt a sense of completion, not in the sense that the journey was over, but in the sense that I'd come full circle. I'd been lost and I'd found myself. I'd been small, and I'd learned to take up space. I'd been afraid, and I'd discovered courage. The Margaret who walked into her apartment that afternoon was fundamentally different from the one who'd fled from that party in tears a year ago. She was confident without being arrogant, strong without being hard, open without being naive. She knew her worth, maintained her boundaries, and loved herself enough to demand that others treat her with respect. And if they didn't, well, she was no longer afraid to walk away. That evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. It was a photo she'd drawn at school, a picture of the two of us holding hands, big smiles on both our faces. The caption read, "Me and Nana Margaret, best friends forever." I smiled, saving the image to my phone. This, I thought, this is what standing up for yourself looks like. Not just the dramatic moments of confrontation, but the quiet joys that follow. The authentic connections, the genuine love, the life lived on your own terms. I'd learned that you teach people how to treat you. For years, I'd taught others that I would accept anything, that my needs were negotiable, that I was willing to disappear rather than cause discomfort. But now I was teaching a different lesson, that I matter, that my voice deserves to be heard, that my presence is not an imposition but a gift. And the beautiful thing? The people who truly loved me rose to meet this new standard. David became more attentive, more present. Jessica became more respectful, more genuine. Emma got to see what a strong, self-respecting woman looked like. And Gerald? He got to know the real me, not some diminished version performing for approval. As darkness fell and the city lights began to twinkle below, I thought about the title that could be given to this chapter of my life, The Year I Found My Voice. From doormat to dignity, the transformation of Margaret. But perhaps the simplest and truest title would be The Year I Chose Myself, because that's what it all came down to. In that moment at the party, when Jessica told me to shut up, when I stood there humiliated and exposed, I'd been given a choice. I could have continued as I was, accepting the unacceptable, shrinking further and further until I disappeared completely. Or I could choose myself. I chose myself. And that choice, made in a moment of pain and anger, became the foundation for everything that followed. Every boundary I set, every uncomfortable conversation I had, every time I prioritized my own needs and well-being, I was choosing myself again and again. And you know what? The world didn't end. My son didn't abandon me. My granddaughter still loved me. The people who mattered adjusted and adapted. And the ones who couldn't, well, their absence made room for healthier relationships. I wish I could say I never doubted myself, never questioned whether I'd done the right thing. But that would be a lie. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I'd overreacted, if I should have tried harder to work things out while staying in the guest house, if I was being selfish. But then I'd remember how I felt before. The constant anxiety, the feeling of walking on eggshells, the way I'd stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. And I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they were better than the slow erosion of my spirit that had been happening before. Now, As I prepared for bed in my own apartment, in my own space, on my own terms, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the false peace of accommodation, but the real peace of authenticity. The peace that comes from living in alignment with your values, from treating yourself with the same kindness and respect you offer others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to choose myself or choose comfort. But tonight, I could rest easy knowing that I'd done the hardest part. I'd taken the first step and then the second and then the thousandth. I'd walked through fire and come out transformed. And if that woman at the party could see me now, standing in my own strength, living my own life, surrounded by people who truly valued me, I think she'd be proud. No, I know she'd be proud. Because she'd recognize that this wasn't a different woman. This was who she'd always been underneath, waiting for the right moment to emerge, waiting for enough pain to outweigh the fear, waiting for the courage to finally choose herself. And when that moment came, she didn't waste it. Neither did I.